everybody. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy. I am very, very excited. Tonight we have a special event with two amazing San Diego locals. We have Dianne Dotson, and then we have Jonathan Maberry. I am going to go ahead and let Jonathan take it over, and we are here today for Dianne's book. I don't want to butcher the pronunciation. Accretion. Accretion. There we go. Okay, Jonathan, take it away. You guys are in for such a treat tonight.
Hi, and thanks for joining us for this virtual book launch in this weird plague-ridden digital age where at least we can do this. So that's a big thing. That's right. It's my pleasure to be here with Dianne Dotson, who is an independent author, and this is her third novel in the wonderful series. And I'd like to actually start with Dianne introducing yourself. Talk a little bit about who you are, and then we'll go into why you wrote this and what it's about and all the fun stuff.
I am local San Diego author Dianne Dotson, and I'm a science writer as well as science fiction and fantasy author. And I have written the Questrison Saga after a series of stories I developed over 30 years ago as a young teen. And I first came out with Heliopause, the first book in the series, in 2018, which was followed the following year by Ephemeris, and then just recently, Accretion. And Accretion follows the tale of the Questrison Saga, which in Heliopause begins at the edge of our solar system and quickly takes off in a direction that nobody could have anticipated, and making things a little more exciting in the galaxy at large. So Accretion then turns things on its head and heads sort of spiraling almost out of control towards book 4, which will be out next year. And I'm almost halfway done with that now. So
is there a working title for book 4?
There is, but I don't tend to reveal the titles until I have the cover art, which, which I love. Leon Tucker does the art and Dash Creative does the cover design. So we'll have all that ready sometime early next year. And then I'll do the cover reveal and the title. I know the title, and it sort of goes along with the theme of space related titles. So
nice. So, you're a science writer. What kind of science do you write about?
Well, as a science writer contracted, I've been writing all kinds of things over the years. I started writing content for biotech. I've written for ecology, which is my science background, is ecology and evolutionary biology. And I've written for clinical research. And more recently, I've done some content management and other articles. They've ranged from astronomy to talking about otters, which I actually love to do. So
now, are these pieces that the public can find somehow, or are they for specific markets that are kind of closed to the outside?
It depends. You can read some of my work on my own website. If you go to jdiannedotson.com, you can go up to the top of the website. There's science writing articles, and there are links to several, but that's not comprehensive. That's only a few. And a lot of my articles are on sciencing.com. So you could do a Google for that, of various topics. And other sites are more just company sites. And I'm kind of the voice of the company, but not, you don't tend to see my name associated with it. So
cool. Now, my background is also nonfiction writing. I started out writing magazine features. I went to journalism school and all that. I didn't really set out to write fiction, and I wound up writing fiction. So, you also have a background in hard science, and you write science articles. At what point did that switch? You say you've been working on this idea for 30 years, but having the idea for 30 years and actually writing it. So at what point did you say, okay, I'm going to sit down and actually write fiction? How did that happen?
Well, I started writing the fiction as a young teen. I was already discovering and learning about nature. And so I already had a scientific bent, but I was also an active writer. I wrote poetry. And then I finished actually the first full novel of what would eventually become this series at the time. And my English teacher even approached publishing companies on my behalf in 8th grade. And, they were sort of like, oh, if you really want to do this, we can do this, but you are a young writer and you probably want to hone your craft. And I, for whatever reason, decided that was probably the best idea. And so I just continued on with my education and eventual work. And then I came back to fiction after graduating college because it was way too busy to do it then. And sort of dabbled in it for a while. 2005, I wrote a fair chunk of what's now Ephemeris, so it's a little bit out of order. And then I came back to it in about 2016. I met a friend of mine, Nathan Camp, who is a nonfiction editor for science papers. And I call him the man who saved Heliopause, because he's the one who encouraged me to finish the stories and actually get them done and get them out. So for him, I'm eternally grateful.
That's fantastic. Now, writing is a funky thing. I mean, when we sit down to write nonfiction, we can rely on the essentially the facts of the story and be able to put them together into an article or a book or something. But when it comes to writing fiction, we're so deep in our own head. It's so revelatory.
You're frozen up there, Jonathan. Jonathan, you're frozen on my feed. Constance, can you?
He's frozen on my feed as well.
Okay.
All right, I'm back. You guys were frozen on mine, so.
Okay, you're back for me.
Okay, for those.
You're back for me as well.
We're having some sort of technical issue. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Let me go back to the question I was asking. I don't know if you heard it, so I'll repeat it. With nonfiction, we have the facts to protect us. We're doing research. We're putting together things that are, grounded in our world. But when you write fiction, that's so personal. It comes from deep inside of us. So, what made you want to take that leap into the world of make believe?
Well, I sort of grew up in it as a way of dealing with growing up as the youngest child by several years and feeling almost like an only child. One of the reasons I wrote fiction to begin with as a young teen was to keep myself company. I lived out in the country. My friends weren't very close by. And I basically started making my own universe full of strong women characters and aliens and robots and everything that I loved at the time in science fiction. But I still didn't have quite the story that I wanted. So I just decided to make it myself. And so the fiction started before I went into science and before I wrote for science. So that's just, it's sort of like a loop around in a way. I started the fiction first, did the science, came back to the fiction, but I was more informed of science after that. And having read books like Dune, which rely upon ecology and other things, I was able to kind of draw into that a little bit for some of my world building.
Yeah, we're gonna go into that in just a second. So I do want to hear about how your life sciences and ecological sciences and so on play into what you write. But for those who may be tuning into this who haven't read her books yet, without a lot of spoilers, can you give us some idea of what this saga is about?
Well, in Heliopause, it starts with a man named Forster who is working at Mandira Research Station, which is set at the edge of our solar system called the Heliopause, and that's in the 23rd century. So it's in the future. We do still exist, thankfully. And he starts to see flashes of light that outside of his window that nobody else can. And someone else on the station thinks it's related to a missing daughter. And then an attack happens on a captain on his way to the station. So there's something out there deep in space that's taking advantage of people taking over their minds and wanting to form telepathic links so it can grow. And this being is called Peosh Tohan. And it is a being that thrives on suffering and will continue to grow, metastatic growth, almost like a cancer in the galaxy, and take over everything in its path. So Forster's drawn into this, not realizing he has a latent telepathic ability himself. And so when he's drawn into this, there's a greater scope at hand. This menace has become a problem in the galaxy and it's getting worse. And at the same time, there's a catastrophic natural disaster that's been predicted for millennia called the event. And when that happens, that will create an opportunity for Peosh Tohan to take advantage of everyone's suffering and fleeing the event. And so there's a stone featured in Heliopause, a little purple stone that one of the denizens of Mandira Research Station wears around his neck. And what nobody realizes at first is that the keeper of that stone, who's not in Heliopause until the very, very end, is a person of incredible power, although she doesn't realize it yet. And she looks human, but she isn't. And her name is Galla-Deia. And she and her story come more into play in Ephemeris and Accretion. And so the people from Mandira Research Station and Galla-Deia and her background begin to interweave, and they're all stuck in this together. And without each other, they can't defeat Peosh Tohan.
Now, structurally, that's a little, that speaks to some books like Dune that you mentioned and others where sometimes the narrative is handed off from character to character. And you have pretty broad cast of characters in the story, and they're not all human. So, there is an element of diversity in there. Is that an intentional? Are you intentionally trying to build diversity, or did you have some other plan with that? How did that come about?
I am very inclusive in the books in terms of the broad scope, not only of humanity and diversity in humanity itself, but also I want there to be a galaxy in which it's not human centric. And so therefore you have androids, aliens, drones, monsters, galactic mages, the whole gamut of things that you would love in a space opera, but which also has some dabblings in fantasy. So, and a lot of people say that fantasy is, magic is really technology we don't understand yet. Well, I play a little bit with that too. So yes, it was intentional that I would have a broadcast of characters from various backgrounds, because I didn't want it to lean on one person and have that person be the person like Paul Atreides from Dune example, on which the whole galaxy relied. No, you need a team to save the galaxy.
Nice. And we do have our first questions. Glenn asked, what books or authors do you feel are closest to your own writing, your own writing style?
Let's see, I probably straddle two very different kinds of books, but I draw into it for science fiction. I like to lean sort of into the descriptive style of Philip Pullman and his Dark Materials. I like the down-to-earth characters of Robin McKinley's Damar books, like The Blue Sword and The Hero and the Crown. And I always liked her strong women characters who were also very flawed, and had a lot of imperfections. So I like to think that I'm sort of in between those two authors. I would love to be anyway. And, I draw upon some humor, and there's some cheese, so for a little bit of that, I kind of draw back on Douglas Adams a tiny bit, and so I sort of slyly wink at him every once in a while. But for the most part, it's not overt humor, and I do go dark. So, I probably in Accretion, you'd probably compare me more to George R.R. Martin. So not to spoil too much there, but.
You're not afraid of leaving some blood on the ground or the deck. So as you're writing this, now, are you a plotter or a pantser? And for those who don't know what the difference is, a plotter actually plots out the entire book. A pantser writes by the seat of their pants. They make it up as they go. Where do you fall in that?
Well, it's all in my head. I don't have a bulletin board full of index cards, and I don't have this elaborate computer situation either, but it's been in my head over 30 years. And so I know the story. I've always known how it would end. And, now I'm getting to the point where I'm reaching that ending. And so in that regard, you could say that I'm a plotter, but at the same time, this story has evolved as I've evolved as a person, as a writer, as an adult, with my own life experiences to inform me in my writing. And so, of course, when you're writing characters and you have new characters to introduce, which I have many, sometimes they have a life of their own and they're going to do what they're going to do. And I'm like, oh my God, well, I guess you need to come back in over here, and so I like to let them live their own lives too, and keep it organic, for lack of a better word.
Right. Now with Accretion, what can you tell us about this book without spoiling it for those who may only have read the first book so far, or maybe are reading the second book? How do you pitch this without spoiling it?
Groundwork for Accretion begins in Heliopause at Mandira Research Station. And the implication is that we have a force out in space that's wanting to take over all of us. Every being that can suffer is at this thing's mercy. And so Heliopause builds up a small team that has long-term implications that nobody really realized. And among them, two characters whose descendants will play a role as well in all of this. And it's very much, Accretion is a family story, as is Heliopause, as is Ephemeris. And this family has to deal with the end of the galaxy and try to stop it. And drawing upon finding the strength within yourself to do that, and trying not to get distracted by your own emotions and attachments to other people is also part of the challenge. And so with Accretion, we're taking the fight out to the galaxy. We're not waiting for it to come to us. So
I like the proactive feel of that. Also, it's a really, for those who buy it, you may notice that my cover quote is on the top. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a good old ripping yarn, and it is really good space opera. Now, again, I want you to explain to the folks what's the difference between space opera and you know, the say hard science fiction, like 2001? What defines space opera for you?
I often think of space opera as not being sort of defined by a near future situation. Oh, this is relatively near, 23rd century versus Dune's 10,000 or so years. So in space opera, you're more leaning into the adventure. You're not getting caught up into the techno babble, so to speak, of some of the harder science fiction. And a lot of the harder science fiction tends to be, although not all of it, it tends to be battle related. And at least that's what I've noticed over the decades. And this, while it has battles, also leans very much into character driven stories. You know, you have to care about the characters to stay invested. You could talk about technobabble all day about hard sci-fi and sticking only to what we know. But in fact, we don't know what we don't know. And so that's where I play a little bit with the space opera in the manner that Star Wars and Star Trek to a lesser extent did, by, you know, sort of broadening what we know about the galaxy and universe at large. And so, and you have some fun with it, and you bring in some drama, and you bring in relationships and problems and heartbreak and angst and all the things that make us human or inhuman in the case of certain large insects and androids that I have in the books too.
You know, I was in a conversation I had many years ago with Theodore Sturgeon, a great science fiction writer from eras past. He said hard science fiction is about space where there are people in it, whereas space opera is sort of about people who are in space.
Right.
And yours is definitely space opera because it is really about the characters. Now, before I go to more questions, that we're getting some nice questions here. If you take Star Wars, Star Trek, and Babylon 5, right? Where does this hew closest? You know, of those three, which universe is Accretion a little closer to?
Let's see, if this is a triangle, and that's fitting for Babylon 5, having the triangle.
Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, I know. And so it definitely leans towards Star Wars, but it's set within our future. It's not set in some galaxy far, far away. And so, you know, I think it's kind of in the middle of all three. I don't really see it really drawing toward a gravity well of one of those three. There's definitely elements of all three stories in this that you could, if you were a fan of any of them, I think that you would like this series. And I have to add though, let's add another piece, another angle, Doctor Who. So, and without Doctor Who, you know, I mean, I have to say that while Doctor Who was a more recent influence on my work, it's always been in the back of my head ever since it came on PBS and was this giant fro and this enormous scarf of this crazy dude and this weird things called Daleks. So, you know, there's definitely some whimsy and, you know, having an inhuman character with human characteristics. I definitely find that in Doctor Who more than in Star Trek, Star Wars, or Babylon 5. So, you know, I'd say it's a square, and I'm somewhere in the middle of that square.
So it's a little more in the Whoverse. Okay, so question is, will book 4 end the saga?
Yes, book 4 is the end of the series. Although I will say, and this has been asked, so I'll go ahead and say it, would I be interested in offshoot stories of some of the characters? And I have considered that, and it's a possibility because, as you had mentioned, and it's true, I have a broad cast of characters, and the timeline of this series is also quite long. You know, and in the prologue of Ephemeris, you have an android who's been alive for 1 million years. And so, you know, there's a lot of stories, you know, and while the characters that we know take place in a much more tightened timeline, even there you have things to play with and different stories, and relativity is a function of that. A bit of a spoiler, but I won't say for who, you know, and so you could go crazy with all these side stories and what happens next.
Cool. Will there be more stories? I mean, like short stories or spin-offs or anything, or is before just absolutely going to wrap everything?
Well, I mean, I have written several short stories just to kind of flesh out some of the occurrences in the saga and the timeline itself. So those could be published, and you know, I have ideas for more, so it's possible. And they would probably be something like Questri Tales or something like that.
Nice. We have a question from Bradley. dialogue can make or break a scene, and your dialogue is quite natural and puts the reader right there. Can you speak to your process for writing dialogue? Do you play out the scenes like a movie?
Well, it's kind of funny because when I was a young teen and I was coming up with this stuff, my house had a woods next to it, and I was a big tomboy. I used to go out in the woods and enact entire scenes between characters, kind of in the way that Sir Patrick Stewart does with his Christmas Carol, where he switches characters in a scene he's acting. I did that. And so I was always fleshing out these different scenes, never having been properly trained, and I still haven't, on dialogue. And I think for my part, I have kind of a photographic memory of people's dialogue in the real world. And I draw on that sometimes. And it just seems like, I don't know, for me, it's natural that I've written dialogue for now several decades, and it's just second nature for me. And I have tons of fun coming up with dialogue. And sometimes there's something that'll just occur to me and I'll write it down. Other times it's more, more that you concentrate on it, like a bit of poetry almost. So it's just a fun mix, and I just have great fun doing it. So in a way, yes, I do play out the scenes like a movie or a conversation that we would have like this.
Nice. Melissa asks, will they be coming to ebook or audio? Anything?
Well, fortunately, the whole series is available in any form of ebook that you like. It's Apple, Kindle, the whole 9 yards, Kobo, and everything else. So you can find it anywhere that ebooks are sold.
And audio?
Audio has not been done yet. I have strong interest in doing that. As an indie author, for me, it's a different ballgame because I have to pay for everything myself. And getting a good voice actor is not cheap, and you would want to invest in a good one. And I already have a couple of in mind, Ray Porter being one. And so I really have been asked from day one, would I do this? And I really want to. So it's my hope that I can, somehow make that happen in the next couple of years.
Fantastic. Now let's talk about the indie author thing for just a moment. There's traditional publishing, and there's indie publishing, and there's hybrid publishing, which is a little bit of both. What made you choose the indie route rather than the conventional route?
Well, given that this thing has been in my head for so long, and since the late 80s, I decided that I wanted to tell this story my way. And we had reached a point in time in which technology and sheer creativity had made indie publishing something rather unique and doable. And, we could have it on a global scale with distribution. And so Ingram Spark is who I chose to distribute these books through, and they generate it in ebook and in paperback form. I didn't do hardback, that was a personal choice. So I wanted it available to as many people as possible. And choosing indie allowed me the creativity to have my own sketches, which I do my own artwork, and then to use those to give to an artist so that my concept art and what I wanted for design would show up on the covers themselves by someone who's much better at it than I am. And so that's creative control that you couldn't have, as a traditional author, but I have that. And so having that sort of creative control is hugely appealing, as this is based off my own sketch, this ship. So I just felt strongly it was my own vision. I've thought about it for so long. I even have had glossaries and indexes and all kinds of things from when I was a kid, all through all this, my own sketches, probably a few thousand sketches of different kinds of spacecraft, of characters, of crazy fashions. It's my baby. I wanted to do it my way.
Nice. And one of the things about indie publishing is you can tell when an indie book is cheaply done, and you can tell when an indie book is done so well that it looks like it's a traditionally published book. And you have excellent art and great design. I've heard you talk about the process of getting this design to the point where it looks exactly like something you want your name on. Is that, talk about that painstaking process of getting the book to be your vision.
Well, it was quite a process because you have to start with the vision itself. And I had a strong opinion about what kind of art I wanted. I wanted something that would lean into some of the retro science fiction cover art, particularly by Vincent DeFate and John Berkey. Those were my go-tos. I said to the artist, this is who I want you to look at. I want a cover art that does not look computer generated. I want it to look like a painting, although I know everybody's using computer. And of course, Leon Tucker took that and ran with it. It looks like a painting, but it is digital art. And I got to watch him do this live, and it was actually incredible how quickly he could do it. And so the process of having the designer, we had a main designer who sort of hooked me up with Leon, and then he spearheaded the original editions of these. These are the latest editions, and there's a different cover team, but the artist is the same. Leon Tucker's the same. So Leon and I went back and forth a lot over these past few years. You know, I would give him concept art. He would give me, you know, his rough drafts, his sketches, and then he would start to 3D model the covers, which was really cool. And so it's just a back and forth process, which I think most authors might not participate in or even want to, but in my part, because I had done art myself, I thought it was a blast and I loved it. And so, you know, that's just a unique aspect of this that I was very pleased to be part of the actual design and being the brains behind it, because without my vision, those don't exist.
That's excellent. Now, Mary Elizabeth had said, speaking of art, what about the art swag you have for the, you know,
Oh, yeah.
order from Mysterious Galaxy? And that, by the way, includes cool postcards of your original art.
Right.
And has character information on the back, stickers, and my favorite piece, this bookmark, which actually has pronunciation guides on it, which I haven't seen before on a bookmark. And it's a really good idea I'm going to steal. Just like, you know, it's a
all
great
right.
idea.
I'll allow that.
So, you know, what made you come up with this particular type of swag? And by the way, for those who don't know, swag means stuff we all get. And this is stuff that you get if you order it from Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore with your book.
And so, only there. So
talk about this part of the process.
Well, I just think it's really fun. I like swag myself. I like free stuff, and I like if it has some sort of significance to the story. And so, as I had mentioned, you know, having done all this artwork, again, that's part of the design element. And there's really good companies out there who can make swag for you. And I just, you know, I uploaded images and went from there. And the bookmark with a pronunciation guide was an idea by my friend Rusty, another author. And actually, there are pronunciation guides in the backs of the books. And particularly when you get to Ephemeris and Accretion, you really are going to need them. So, but I thought, you know, this is a perfect way of something that you could have that is functional and it looks cool, you know, and it's not something that everybody's done. So that was just it's just fun. Swag to me is fun. It's something special, that it's collectible, that's unique. You know, this is not a mass distribution situation. So if you get your swag, you're one of only a very few people who will get it. And when I started doing conventions, I had swag like patches and stickers and things like that and postcards. But since there are no conventions, you know, now the only way you're going to get the swag is if you order from Mysterious Galaxy. So it's just fun.
And speaking of fun, I mean, on social media, you have a good social media game. Your Instagram is really on point. And, you know, pictures like this, you'll post the step-by-step process of doing this, which allows the readers to join in the fun that you're having. What made you decide to do that?
Well, I thought, you know, you're always trying to keep things fresh on social media, and particularly Instagram being so image heavy. I thought it would be a lot of fun since I was doing the art anyway. Well, what if I just started doing an Instagram story of it, or took still pictures of it and just showed people, here's what it looks like when I start. It looks terrible, right? It's just like this gobbledygook. But that's not what final art looks like. So I thought, well, this might be fun. Why don't I just show you what it's going to look like at every stage? And I've been doing that a lot lately with some little watercolor cards I was working on. And those were extremely challenging because of their small scale. I mean, I'm used to working with much bigger watercolor paper, which is what I did for the Gala and Plip art on that postcard you showed. That's a much larger picture. In fact, it's hanging back here on the wall. That's it right there, the original. So I just, again, it's a fun element. I just wanted to share, and because I want people to feel too that they can share. And you don't have to have this perfect art, you know, it's fun to just unveil your work as you go.
Fun is a big part of this. I mean, if it's not fun, we're doing it wrong. You know?
Exactly.
Mark has a question. Have you made any discoveries about yourself from the process that you're willing to share as you developed as a writer in writing this latest book?
In the latest book, it's very personal. I was going through a lot in 2019 as I wrote Accretion, and you can tell there's definitely a bleed through of personal feelings and feelings of regret in making bad decisions and things of that nature. So as a writer, I've grown in terms of what I'm sharing a bit more of my actual spirit. It's not just words on paper. It really is part of me and my own life and experiences. And Accretion really crystallizes that. And book 4, of course, with everything that's happened lately this year, definitely, again, you will see part of me coming through and processing my feelings.
Well, to go a little further with that, Glenn asked, did you have to change anything in your story that's been in your head since you were a kid, now that you're writing it as an adult? I mean, he's asking what has changed in your storytelling from the original vision to the vision you actually wrote?
Well, as an adult, we have the lens of experience, and now that I'm in my late 40s, I've come through sort of a full circle of education and life experience and hard knocks. I think that, there's just things I couldn't have written at age 13 and 14. Some things would have been inappropriate to have written, although I can't say I didn't try, especially with regards to personal relationships and things like that. But I think the intimacy of what I've written is much more powerful now because I can speak to my own experience. I'm not just imagining this full-blown relationship. I've been there, I've done that. I've been in massive relationships and they've imploded and things like that, and I've been challenged at work and different things like this and come up against other people's decisions that I don't agree with. And those are things you really only know about as an adult. And I feel like I can speak to that.
Now, authors like Michael Moorcock, who's a British fantasy writer, he has a habit of every once in a while he'll go in and revise his earlier works. So any thought that you might at some point decide that you want to revise the previous books once the series is done? Or are you happy with where they are? I
don't want to toy around with it George Lucas style because that kind of horrifies me. I have to say, going back to Philip Pullman, there's a part in one of his books in his Dark Materials trilogy that drove me absolutely crazy, and it was an editing thing. And it was an eye color for, I believe it's Stel Maria, Lord Asriel's demon. And in one scene, she has one eye color, and another she has a different eye color. I'm like, how, upon multiple printings, did the editors miss that? It drove me nuts. But I thought at the same time, you know what? Actually, I'm cool with it staying like that. I'm cool with there being imperfections. And, as a saga is growing, you're growing too as a writer. And it's going to get more involved and hopefully better as you go along. And so I feel like going back and tweaking Heliopause is kind of pointless, but I can also play in the same universe like we talked about earlier and tell stories, but I don't really want to mess with Heliopause itself. I think it's a finished work and I'm going to keep it that way.
Yes. Constance asked, are there any specific languages that inspired the names of the characters?
I have been asked this before, and I have not absolutely leaned into that. It was interesting. As a kid, I had not taken Latin, and so actually I didn't take Latin until college, and I had already named Gala and Ariad, and they sound kind of Latin or Greek, depending on the different things. And the funny thing about that too was I leaned into some mythology. It was sort of a Hades and Persephone story between Ariad and Gala a little bit. And Dimetron, the star city Dimetron, of course, is a reference to Demeter. So that's where that came from. So there was a little bit of playing around with Latin and Greek characters, but I didn't lean into it much. And so everything else is just made up out of my head, like little soap bubbles that pop. So.
Now, do you have any, this is a two-part question. Are there any characters that are autobiographical? And are those characters your favorite character or characters in the book?
So both Forster and Gala are sort of autobiographical. The flaws in Forster and Gala are not necessarily my own flaws, but I'm a quite flawed person, especially in relationships. And I'm not afraid to talk about that. And I didn't want them to be afraid to admit their faults in relationships too, and that they had regrets and that they could mature and adapt and grow as people and in their interactions with others, whether romantic or work relationship, because both of those come into play. And so they're both a little bit autobiographical. Forster is, he's in a situation where he's got a lot of regrets and he's seeking something. He's seeking a purpose. He wants there to be more to his life than just this constant regret and like, oh, I messed up again, you know. So that's definitely part of me. And then Gala is, you know, she starts out rather feral and raised by androids, and she doesn't know how to be a person. She doesn't know how to be human. When I was growing up in East Tennessee and as the youngest and a super nerd among, you know, people out in the country, they didn't know what to think about me. And I never felt like I belonged to anything there. And so I felt very much fish out of water. And so I put a bit of that into Gala too, and her naive aspects early in life as well. So there's a little bit of that. And in terms of there being my favorite, I enjoy writing both Forster and Gala, but I have a lot of other favorites in the series, like Sumond and Beetle, Rob Iden, you know, and there's more favorites to come in book 4. And book 4, part of which I had written decades ago, you know, it's when I come back to book 4, it's like coming home.
That's fantastic. Now, Mark asks, he said he finds Hilly Paws very cinematic.
Thank you.
How would you feel about it becoming a TV show or movie? And do you have any vision of that?
I've often been asked, well, would you like a movie? And I usually say, no, I'd rather have a show. And because the character development is just not something that you could quite get in a movie, you know, for what I'm trying to do here, you know. And that's where I kind of have problems with things like film adaptations of Dune, that it sort of works better to do these character development situations and the mythology building over a period of time in which you get to know these people and the stories unfold slowly and speed up and slow down and speed up. And you have these varying things. Where in a movie, you've got a couple of hours, boom, you're done. And then there's this huge gap of time until the next one. So I would love to have maybe a Netflix series or some other streaming series of the whole book series itself. And it would be really fun to watch as things change and the scope of everything expands.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the character development that unfolds in TV shows too. It's kind of my personal bias as well.
Yeah.
Now you've been pretty active in the San Diego writing community with the Writers Coffee House and a lot of other groups. What does involvement with a group of other writers do for you, and what do you do for that community?
I would say that one of the best things that's ever happened to me has been to be part of your Writers Coffee House. And I just expanded immediately as a writer, but also appreciating the business behind it, which you always take great care to explain. And knowing that I'm not alone, knowing that there are writers at every stage, and just building upon that community and reaching out and asking for help. You know, it's a wonderful gift to have that sort of community. And San Diego's writing community, I had no idea when I moved here that there even was one, much less one as good as this. And I've grown so much, and I have to thank you for a lot of that, you know, and Henry and all the other members of Writers Coffee House.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and Mysterious Galaxy for hosting us too.
Mysterious Galaxy has been from the beginning an absolute gem of a store, and all the events that I've taken part in as an author and as a reader have been wonderful.
Fantastic. Now, Anne asks, tell us about how you develop the fashions in Ephemeris and Accretion. The descriptions help the reader visualize the outfits and the characters. So where does that come from?
Well, the writing and the art developed together. I was drawing as I was writing from being a child on. And so I had a lot of fun starting to come up with my own, what I call galactic fashions. And I have albums and albums full of thousands of illustrations of crazy fashions. And keeping in mind that this was the late 80s when I began the stories and the fashions, I have things that would make RuPaul blush. And so I just have had so much fun with that. And I wanted to include it in the stories eventually. And Gala was a good template for that because, you know, I'm kind of like Gala, like my uniform on a daily basis is probably blue jeans. She doesn't want to wear glamorous outfits, but she's pushed into that as part of a role that she has to play. And it kind of puts me in mind of a fellow Appalachian, because I'm from East Tennessee, Dolly Parton. Now, Dolly Parton, you look at her and she's fantastically dressed, you know, coiffed and everything. And it's a show. And so, but why is it a show and why is it important? Well, fashion is a statement, and what you wear says something, and fashion is intentional. And for the fashions that I came up with in the series, they lean into the characters' personalities, particularly in Accretion. There's a scene in which a mage taps into the personalities of the people, you know, of the Fivich, the main ship in the book, and he's figuring out what they're all kind of like, and he makes clothes tailored to their personalities for them to wear. And it's something that none of them expects, but they all love it because they're like, never been done for them before, and that sort of thing. So it's really great fun for me to visualize fashion, and I call it space drag in a lot of ways. When I wear outfits in my book signings that match the book covers. You know, I've had like a navy blue dress with, you know, yellow shoes, and I've had a big sparkly pale blue dress, and, you know, and in Accretion's sake, I kind of just went with whatever I had because we're in a pandemic. So you know, it's just another aspect of fun for me to have galactic fashion, and one day maybe I'll just make just a whole book of that. I don't know.
That'd be fun. I'm thinking, you know, Project Runway Galactic Edition.
I'm all in.
So Joseph asked, if you were a geek in rural community that didn't understand you, when and where did you find your tribe?
I mean, I invented my tribe because I invented all these characters to be my friends in my head, essentially. But I basically pushed it down everybody else's throats. I sort of forced myself as a geek to try to make other geeks. And in a little burg that I grew up in, I would push my stories on anybody who would listen. And I feel bad for them in retrospect. You know, that's like, they probably just wanted me to leave them alone. But by God, I started my own neighborhood astronomy club, and these kids didn't know what to think. So here I am teaching them about the magnitude of stars, the different constellations, and, you know, the possibility of, you know, exoplanets and things. And this was back in the 80s, and I was all in. I totally thought that's what we would eventually figure out, and we did. And so I just pushed it on people. And I didn't really find my tribe, though, not really until much later in life. And, you know, that it took, I mean, I guess it was probably not until the 90s that I started meeting more people, especially in college, who liked things that I liked. You know, you find them or you make them.
That's great. I have one more question, and then I have one of my own questions for you. But Mark asks, I know you're still immersed in the current story, but do you have any hint of any other worlds you're looking forward to exploring?
Well, I actually have several other stories in the works, and one of them is a dark middle grade fantasy that leans into Southern Appalachia. And I really don't want to spoil that, but the research I'm having to do for what I'm trying to pull off with that story is quite involved and leans into some science that would be unexpected and really cool. And I would also I would be world building in a way that would be similar to something that Tolkien would do in terms of fantasy and the kind of fantastical characters there. I also have some campy, dark horror stories in the works. And, you know, that would be kind of drawing upon things like Heathers and Army of Darkness and lots of gore. And I have so many stories to tell, some of which are fantasy sci-fi, some of which are horror, some of which are lacking a real genre, and some of which are sort of semi-autobiographical of growing up in East Tennessee back in the 80s as well. So lots of worlds out there to explore for sure.
So we will be getting more fiction from you.
Yes, you will.
Cool. So we're almost out of time, but so let's talk about where people can find you online and how they can find you online. So where are you online?
I have a website, jdiannedotson.com, and that's 2 N's, but I also have it under the misspelling of 1 N. So you can find me there, and you can find me on Twitter at jdiannedotson, which is the same handle at Instagram. And it's jdiannedotson facebook.com/jdiannedotson is my author page on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so you can find me there. Basically, if there's social media, I'm probably on it. So.
Okay, and if people order the book from Mysterious Galaxy, will they be able to get it signed by you?
Yes, if you order, I want to say by July 9th, I can't remember the date, but you can have it personalized and signed by me. I'll go in person and do that. And there is the opportunity probably for book plates to be signed as well. I do have some book plates available. So, but if you order from Mysterious Galaxy Books, you can get that swag package, get your book signed, and that's a unique thing that you're not going to get anywhere else. And you're supporting an independent bookstore.
That's fantastic. And I think that wraps us up. Those really good questions from the folks tuning in here. And thanks for sharing your world and your vision with us. And that was a whole bunch of fun.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. And for those who haven't read the books, they are a hoot. They are a lot of fun. They get weird. They take some interesting twists and turns, and they move really damn fast. So it's a really fun series. Read them in order. It is a series. They're not standalones. Read them in order. And when you get to the latest book, you'll find some very well. It starts in a really interesting place too, which is so yeah, it's a fun series.
Thank you.
Dianne, thank you so much. Best of luck with this book and with the rest of the
Thank you.
series. And I can't wait to read book 4.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who stopped by and for all the great questions. And thank you, Mysterious Galaxy Books.
Yay! Thank you to Dianne, and thank you to Jonathan so much, and all of our readers who participated. Seriously, so many amazing questions.
They really were.
And Jonathan mentioned you can purchase the books through us and get the amazing swag package. To make it easy for you guys to find, we have the link where you can purchase those books is going to be, it's attached to this video. If you look right above, I'm pointing and I don't know why I'm pointing because you can't see me, but that is it for us tonight. We will go ahead and say we hope you all have a good evening, and thank you so much to Dianne and Jonathan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.